Goes. Okay, welcome to meeting number 25. Getting up there in the numbers. Some updates to kick things off. We can kind of dive into any feedback, questions, comments, things you want us to address, that kind of stuff after that. I guess starting on the screen that I'm starting on, I'm not sure if anyone has noticed, but over the last couple of days, we have been quietly releasing the 1.0 version of a lot of things. Um, they are pretty close to what, if you've used the 0.5 release, what existed in there. There are a couple changes that have come in, like splitting the arguments. I think we discussed in a previous call. From the options during the construction of sessions, I think was one of them, or maybe it was the session kit. Might have to write a small document that shows those changes. But we are opening everything up today. This is the actual WharfKit website. The new website is live on WharfKit.com. A lot of links go to somewhat sparse areas, but the blog post kind of dives into that a little bit. Talks about the session kit release. We're talking about the website, this being the next phase of the project, where we're going to have this live, more regularly updating website that we're adding documentation and guides and things like that. Of how we got here today with a bunch of links. This history covers almost 2 years that this project's been in the making, and what to expect next. You guys on this call, those of you that have listened to this call regularly, none of this will be a surprise to you. Contract kit is coming, the account kit following shortly thereafter, the transaction builder that we've talked about briefly here, and then we'll be adding some more plugins over time. So encourage you to check that out, to check the website out, and if you are using stuff in your projects, to actually dive in and upgrade to the 1.0. So the 1.0 release mostly represents the resolution of a lot of dependencies and getting everything up to kind of a 1.0 status. The only thing that is really not on 1.0 is the Antelope library, formerly EOSIO core. You can see we're still on 0.7.3. There's probably a 7.4 coming out soon. We published the EOSIO signing request library under the WharfKit banner. And everything should be synced up in actual Semver, which will make our lives a little bit easier now, because we can actually obey real Semver and not be in that 0. World, except for the Antelope library. To kind of dive into some of what is here, the documentation, we have a lot in the pipeline. It just we weren't comfortable pushing the button to push that live right now. But the Antelope library itself has a decent amount of documentation that we published. And then on the flip side, the guide section, we have 2 guides that we have also highlighted in that blog post: getting started with a web app or getting started in Node.js. The web app one is really kind of a theoretical one, because there's so many ways to build a web app, but it does dive into like what design considerations you should have, how you initialize the session kit, then how you use that session to do a couple things. There's no code base specifically behind this, because I don't know, we have like 5 examples now of different code bases. We do provide a link to that, and there's like Vue, React, Svelte, a couple other things in there, and the article in theory should walk you through any of those frameworks. We tried to write it so it was a little agnostic to all of that. And then on the flip side, the Node.js, if you're writing like a script and you are using some sort of server-side thing and just establishing sessions, this actually will walk you through creating a example script that uses the private key plugin with your private key embedded to create a functional app. So there is also a full completed version of the script. It doesn't do a whole lot. It's just there to show, how this all works. I think it just does a token transfer and says hello world. It's a whopping 63 lines of code. You can, oh, we didn't do it in this one. One of the, I'm jumping around a little bit, but one of the feedback points that we took from some of these calls was, passing chain IDs, like in that example, is kind of hard for developers. A new library we have released kind of resolves that. It is the WharfKit Common Library. And let me just go to one of these examples. Pick Svelte because Svelte is fun. And I think it is the login component. We added this. There is now a chains export that is coming from the common library. The session kit also exports it, but it has a bunch of constants that you can use for common blockchains. So for the developer who just needs to get started and wants some defaults, we are now exporting defaults from that common library. That this is basically the chain ID and a default endpoint. So you could call chains.jungle4.id to get the chain ID, or chains.jungle4.url to actually get the URL. Or you could like destructure it and override those values and customize it however you want. So yeah, there been a lot of work leading up to this point. Any and all feedback that you guys have on the website or guides you think we should prioritize, or maybe even things that the existing couple guides we have don't cover well, we're definitely looking for feedback on all of that. As well as in general, the website itself and like how do we best embrace and like bring on new developers that are coming into this space from the front end perspective. We do have links going out to other places for things we don't cover, like this looking to build a smart contract. We have this actually going to the EOS network docs that Nathan and his team have been building out for smart contracts. We're not, Wharf is not about building smart contracts. And so we want to at least point people out to resources that people may need if that's part of their development flow. So yeah, website up, session kit 1.0 released. And yeah, it's a pretty big step forward. We'll be pushing this article out on socials. I think it's already happened, and probably talking about it more either on the fireside today if there's an opportunity, talking about it on our media. Like we're probably going to do some sort of podcast, which might be a live stream this week, which could be kind of fun. And wherever else we can get the opportunity. We want developers to start using the 1.0 of the session kit at this point. Like if you are building an app, brand new app, or you have an existing app, now's the time. Now's the time to get started and give it a try. So we'll continue iterating on this. I know from a milestone perspective and from like the contractual obligation, the session kit at this point is kind of done. All those milestones are complete, but we're not done developing on it. We have things we need to improve, mainly because we just want this to be the right tool for our projects as well. But any and all feedback is definitely welcome. So any questions, thoughts, comments immediately on any of that before I kind of jump to other topics? Can take that as a no for now, but feel free to interrupt me. Alongside of this, the contract kit has seen a couple releases, and we're not promoting them necessarily for public use, but for those of you listening and those of you who want to follow along, there's an 0.3.2 release now of the contract kit that is based on this branch. Playing kind of fast and loose with releases since nobody's using this yet. But the table syntax and the way that data is accessed has hit a somewhat stable position. There was a little bit of discussion, not on that link, on the WharfKit discussion board where I shared some of this with the table row syntax. That's all working. We've divided those components up and published them in this 0.3.2 release. And the PR I was just sitting on is stuff that I finished out last week. That's all around the code generation. We are back working on that aspect of it and have been for a couple weeks now. This code generation portion is what's really going to create strong types in the developer's environment. So that way the IDE is going to know when you're querying a certain table, what the parameters are going to be, what the response type is going to be, and the developer is not going to have to specify any of that. So, if you are filling out a query for querying the producer table on the base index, it's going to know that it wants some type of name because the default index on that table is the owner key, which is, the actual owner of that record. So all that really strong type hinting that is coming will come out of this contract kit code generation suite. And we're hopeful that we'll be able to knock that out here in the next week or two. It's starting to come together. We've had some hurdles using generics, which is we're learning a lot about generics as we go through this. I don't know if anybody listening has ever really gotten deep into them, but in TypeScript, it's just a way to infer typing kind of programmatically. And it's going to play a major role in the code generation portion of all of this. So we're going to be able to use the code generation part to generate code that applies generics to the contract and the table classes that types them all. So that way people's VS Code and everything else will be able to interpret that as the code is being written. So yeah, we're hoping that the contract kit is able to come together and we're able to get a technical preview of that in, like I said, kind of the next week or two. Something that's written up that developers will be able to follow along with, try out one of the beta builds, use it in their application, and then point out the things that they like or that don't work. There's so many different ways to both write a contract and then use the get table rows API to retrieve data from that contract that we just haven't been able to test everything. So having real developers using it in real applications will start giving us a real sense on how this kit needs to morph into something a little bit more usable. It'll be a similar path that we have followed with the where we'll kind of hit a stable position, really encourage trying it out, and then iterate on the feedback we receive to make sure it works in most scenarios before we do a 1.0 release of this contract kit itself. And then once the contract kit is in that stable position, we will use it to build the account kit, in which we'll use the code generation for it. And then we will also be building additional methods and helper functions on top of it. So it's kind of this dependency chain that's going on as we move from session kit to contract kit to account kit. I don't think I necessarily have other updates related to the contract kit itself. Changing gears again, and once again, feel free to interrupt me if there's anything we need to stop and elaborate on. But we are looking at potentially a fourth kit right now, or finding a home for what could be a fourth kit. Maybe it's the contract kit, not entirely sure yet. But a big part of the end of the Wharf project is supporting additional APIs. Things like the Atomic Assets API or Hyperion or other APIs that the developer may need easy access to and want typed responses and all of this like developer experience wrapped around. The original plan when we wrote the proposal for this entire thing for Wharf in general was that this would be part of the contract kit. Over time, it's become kind of apparent that not all APIs are going to be part of the code generation part of the contract kit, and the contract kit has really found its niche exclusively to smart contracts. Not all of these APIs are related to a specific smart contract. So what we may have to do is break that idea apart and develop maybe an API kit or some sort of standalone utility, sort of like we talked about with the transaction builder, that still fills this need but lives somewhere else in a different project. There's a lot of active discussion happening around that right now, and I don't know exactly where it's going to live. But we will hopefully have some news on that in, I don't know, the coming weeks as we move forward on that idea and start building some prototypes. So yeah, I mean, I think that is everything that kind of happened in the last week since we last talked. Obviously, a lot of buildup as we've been working on this website since December, maybe. It's been a little bit of on and off, but it's been a long road getting to this point, from designs to actually implementing it, getting all the features built, then getting the documentation engine in place and starting to write documentation. And we still have a ways to go with it, but yeah, any and all feedback experience that you may see, that you may have, we are very much open to. And since we've been developing in our little bubble, we're just trying to be very aware that working in a bubble like that may bring our assumptions of how things work into the final product. And we'd like those assumptions to be challenged. So yeah, I mean, I think that is all of the updates I have for this week. Happy to jump into some of the table stuff, or maybe into the changes of the session kit if that is something we want to dive into, or yeah, if there's any questions or comments or anything like that. It's a quiet crew today.
No, it looks great. Just like personally, like I haven't updated since some time ago.
because I've been like heavily using it in a project, but I'm looking forward now to update the latest and test out everything.
Yeah, and let us know if there's any specific thing that breaks in the way you were using it, because that might actually be really good for like an update notes or something. Or maybe maybe the audience is so small that we can, handle that stuff on a one-off basis. But
yeah, but it's good to know as well. Like, but the more important will be knowing moving from version 1 onwards, the changes that could be breaking, for example.
Yep. And I don't foresee any breaking changes necessarily, but I mean, there probably will be at some point. We'll use Semver whenever that happens. So if you do an upgrade, just, and update the dependencies automatically, nothing's going to break unless it's a Semver breaking change.
Yeah, that's perfect.
Cool. Yeah, that's kind of all I have. So if we don't have anything else to dive necessarily on today, we can make it a real short one. That's just kind of the announcement of all of this new stuff. And honestly, we'll take this time to start getting out and getting the word out to hopefully get some developers on board and starting to use this as soon as they can. Cool. All right, well, let's end it there, and we can resume again next week if we have updates on the contract kit. I will keep everybody informed on what's going on with that. And yeah, I look forward to seeing what the community builds.
Sounds good. So far, it's working for us flawlessly, and like the testnet use and new DApp use.
Awesome.
So much better than anything else.
Yeah, that I think I mentioned it last week or the week before, but like whenever I find a couple free moments, I've been working on updating Unicove to include Wharf now. And I'm actually using the contract kit in a couple situations on Unicove now as well. And the table query syntax is just so much better than what we're used to. I was able to reduce like a 15 line of code block to query the account delegations to another account down to like 4. And it's just so much cleaner. So
Nice.
Awesome.
Yeah, and scale, this makes a huge difference, especially, like
just maintaining that code, right? It's not just writing it and saving the lines. It's just trying to keep the minimal code you need to maintain.
Yeah. And I don't know if you guys saw the message, I think it was last week or the week before, about the optimizations that are happening in the back end now that we're starting to use the raw data from the APIs. But like I'm just noticing the ability to get so many more records, and the response times are so much lower. Like if we can get the entire ecosystem to start using all those raw endpoints, APIs are just going to get faster because there won't be so much load of those servers deserializing all that data. It's like, let's distribute that load. And it's one of those marketing points that I don't think we've hit on hard enough, but I've been trying to consciously like bring it up whenever I see people talking about API calls.
And it makes a huge difference, like raw versus like deserialized, especially for bigger things.
Yeah.
And like now you're distributing it to the client side, that each client is running their own machine versus one server having to deal with all that,
Yeah. And even on like a super slow potato laptop, like that deserialization is still lightning fast, and you're not going to notice it unless you're making the client deserialize like 1 million rows or something. That's the only time they would notice it. But most of that time would probably be downloading the 1 million rows and not the deserialization of the 1 million rows.
And if you're doing that, maybe you should do it on your own.
Yeah. And then aggregate it and just give them the chunk that they want or something like that.
Yeah.
Awesome. Cool. Well, we will wrap it up here. Thank you all for jumping into the call, and looking forward to reactions after all this announcement stuff. So
right away. Oh,
I clicked the wrong button. I'm sorry.